Let's talk 3D printing. This is my setup. Now, I'm a junior at 3D printing, really, but how can you print things like this? I printed this huge helmet. I printed this amazing, massive capsule. Of course, because I'm a pharmacist, so of course I'm going to print the capsule. But I'm really early on this journey, and I know that when I tried looking into it, I looked online, I looked at what printer to buy, what setup to use, what types of things to print, and things like that. So I want to start a playlist talking through my journey to it. This is my setup. You can see I've got a Bambu Lab P1S, two AMSs, using my capsule to point now. I've got a Skådis IKEA board, and I basically 3D print things to hold all of my tools. So I'm going to talk a bit about A, how 3D printers work, B, what my journey's been like, and C, hopefully you learn something from it. Let me take you for a proper tour. So here's my setup. So you can see I've got a Bambu Lab P1S. I've got loads of little bells and whistles that I added, like a panda screen, which is really nifty and shows you what you print. I've got two AMS units, the AMS2 Pros, and I've got an AMS high temperature, which I use for TPU. But there's loads of little things that you can see that I've printed. Love this little guy who's holding a Sharpie pen. And then the IKEA Skådis board, which obviously you have to buy, is so great, but you can print things like this, things to hang your hammers and your drills, all things like that on. And then just little things like printing a bin. I've printed a World Cup trophy replica. So, I mean, I'm very junior on this journey, but as you can see, I really wanted to get a printer, get loads of different colors so I can do multicolour printing. And I may have gone a bit overboard with how many filaments I bought. And I've tried to sort them out, but I'm failing miserably. But that's my journey. That's my setup so far. Getting there slowly but surely, but it's definitely a journey. I'm definitely very early on that journey, but I wanted to share that with you. And in terms of what my reflections of the Bambu Lab P1S is it's absolutely fantastic as a printer. I've had it now for about a year and a half. Haven't really had any problems whatsoever with it. And I think the AMS system is really, really useful. The fact that you can do multiple colors. And because I've got one of those, or two of those, now I've got 8 colors that I can print from that. And then TPU, which needs a higher temperature to dry it out, is in there. So you can use kind of PLA, PETG in these two. And then the high temperature one, you can use TPU. But you can also use things like ABS, which is a bit more resilient. But generally speaking, I'll print in PLA and PETG. But yeah, that's my setup. So how does a 3D printer work? Most of the ways of making things are subtractive. You start with a block of something and you cut, drill or carve bits away until you're left with the shape. 3D printing flips that on its head. It's additive. Instead of making material, you add a tiny bit at a time, building an object up from nothing. And the clever part is how it builds up, not all at once, but in hundreds of thin, flat layers stacked on top of each other, like a loaf of sliced bread, but in reverse. You're gluing the slices back together, one at a time, until the whole loaf exists. If you think about the type of printer that I use, it's the most common kind. It's called FDM, which stands for Fused Deposition Modeling. It's a fancy name, simple idea. It melts plastic and lays it down in lines. That's it. Everything else is just about doing that precisely. There are really only 4 things you need to understand in terms of how a printer works. The filament, that's the plastic and the material that's fed in. That is fed into the hot end, and that's what melts it. And then the nozzle is what shapes it. And then the motion system is what moves it to exactly the right place. Let's start with the material. It comes as something called filament, basically a long, thin plastic wire wound into a spool, usually about 1.75 millimeters thick. The two you'll hear about the most are PLA, which is easy and made from plant starch, and PETG, which is tougher. That's what I print a lot of my products in as well. Think of it like the ink in a printer, except the ink is a solid strand of plastic, and we're going to melt it. A motor grips the filament and pushes it down into the hot end, a metal block heated to around 200, 220 degrees Celsius. The solid plastic goes in the top and comes out the bottom as soft, molten thread through a nozzle hole that's often just about 0.4 millimeters wide, thinner than a strand of spaghetti. As that molten plastic touches the print, it instantly cools and hardens, fusing to the layer below it. Push filament in the top, squeeze a precise line out the bottom, and move it around. That's the whole trick. Now, to build a whole project, you put that line of plastic in exactly the right spot in 3 dimensions. So the printer moves along 3 axes: X, left and right, Y, forwards and backwards, and Z, up and down. X and Y draw one flat layer, and then Z lifts up by a fraction of a millimeter. A typical layer is 0.2 millimeters, about the thickness of a couple of sheets of paper, and it draws the next layer on top. Do that a few hundred times and a solid object appears. But the printer can't read a 3D model on its own. It doesn't know what a phone stand is. It only understands simple moves. Go here, extrude this much, move up. So before anything prints, the design goes through a piece of software called a slicer. The slicer takes your 3D model and digitally chops it into all those horizontal layers, and for each layer, it works out the exact path the nozzle should take. It writes all of that down as a long list of instructions called G code, literally thousands of lines of move X, Y, Z, push this much plastic. That's the file the printer usually prints. So here's the whole journey in one line. An idea becomes a 3D model on a computer. The slicer then turns that model into layers and instructions. The printer melts the plastic and lays those layers one by one. And a few hours later, you've got a real physical object that never existed before. No factory, no tooling, just plastic, heat, and precise movement. Isn't that clever? So that's my journey into 3D printing. I'm early on the journey. I've got some kit behind me. Every day I'm printing something different. So if you like this video and you want to hear more about my journey and 3D printing in general, subscribe for more.